Hey guys, my name is B, and today I'm going to teach you guys how to remove logos from your image using Photoshop. Hope you enjoy. So the main tools that we're going to use for this is one, the eyedropper. Two, we're going to definitely be using the brush tool. We're going to be using the pen tool as well as the clone stamp tool. And the last one we will be using is the patch tool. So each of these play a huge role in how we're going to remove the logos out of this image. So the first thing that we're going to begin with is we're going to turn this image into a low and high edit. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with it, but I'm going to introduce you guys to the low and high editing method, which is where you're able to take the image and we separate the colors and then we separate the textures. So you're able to really fine tune and go in depth with your editing. So first things first, we're going to start with the first layer and we're going to duplicate it 3 times. So 1, and you're going to drag it right at the bottom here, 2, and 3. So the first layer, we're going to rename it by double clicking it. If you just double click the name, it'll light up and you're able to rename it. So the first one's going to be the before layer. The second one's going to be the high layer. This last one is going to be the low layer. So now we have 4 layers to the right. So we're going to turn off all of these first, and we're going to start with the low layer. So for the low layer, we're going to go to filter, we're going to go to noise, and then we're going to go to dust and scratches. And then we're going to turn our radius up to 9, and you're going to keep the threshold at 0, and then you're going to hit OK. So right now when you zoom into your image, it will look blurry. And I'm going to explain everything in a jiffy. So now that's our low layer. So now we're going to go to our high layer. We're going to press the I and turn that layer on. Then we're going to go to image. We're going to go to apply image. We're going to keep this layer right here. We're going to make sure that it's tackling our low layer. We're going to keep our channel at RGB. We're going to make our blending subtract. We're going to keep the opacity at 100. We're going to turn our scale to 2. Mine is already in it because I do it all the time. So this is for you guys to make sure you change your settings to the scale to 2 and offset to 128. And when you hit OK, now your layer is going to look like this. Looks a little funny. So after this, we're going to go over here to the right where it says normal. And then we're going to change it all the way down to linear light. Perfect. So now when you turn off the high layer, you see it looks blurry. When you turn on the high layer, you have the textures. So basically with this editing method, it basically subtracts the image into 2 different parts. So for instance, I'm going to zoom out a bit. I'm going to play with the clone tool really quickly just to show you guys what it does. So let's say I want to play around with get rid of this hair here. I would, because it's a texture, if you turn it off, you don't see any of that hair in this area, correct? But you see the colors. But when you turn it on, that's when you see the texture of the hair. So if I clone right here, it removes that layer, but I still have the color and I still have her skin color without it being interfered. But if you did, I'm going to go to the before layer. And so best so you're able to see the before and after just from cloning right there. But yes, the low and high method is it's one of the best methods, especially when it comes to retouching skin or just retouching anything in the image. And with this method, I'm gonna really show you how you're able to really make the most out of retouching these logos out of the image. So first, we're going to start with this big logo over here. I'm also gonna get rid of these black dots, get rid of the global, and get rid of, I don't know what this bottom part here says. So first things first, we're going to play around with the clone and the patch tool. So first I'm going to turn off the low layer. And you see, like with this, the black spots here is really simple. So with the clone tool, you have to make sure you're on your layer. So we're going to start with the low layer, which is the color. I love using shortcuts. So make sure that you learn your shortcuts. So with the clone stamp tool, S will be your shortcut to get there. B is the shortcut for brush. So S, we're on the clone stamp, and we're going to, when you hit the option is where you hit your target of where you want to clone from. So anytime I use the clone tool, I try to be as close to, I try to make the target spot as close to where I want to edit as possible so it could resemble the true, whether it's the color or the texture of what I'm trying to clean up. So I'm going to go right underneath it. I'm going to make the circle about the size of this dot here, go right underneath it, click the target, and then now just cover it up just like that. You want to make sure that your hardness is to the lowest, because when it's high, edges of the brush, and that's what you don't want, because then you can see it when you zoom out. We're going to undo that, and we're just going to go back and make sure that our hardness is to the lowest, and then we're just going to go around it, and voila. Then I'm also, before I leave that area, I'm going to turn off the high layer. I'm just going to clone that up and just clean it up so it, wrong thing. I'm going to make sure you click that clone and just clean it up to make sure that the texture looks the same there. So that's the first part. So we're going to go to this little dot down here and do the same exact thing. So we're going to start with we'll turn off the high layer. We'll go to the low. Going to click right by it. You're just going to click around it to make sure it's the same. Turn on the high layer. You see right here is the little line. So we're just going to try to clone that noise and that texture. And whoop, didn't even look like it was there. All right, so now we're going to slide over here. So there's two ways that you can go. The great thing about Photoshop is that there's numerous ways where you can get the same results. So I'm going to show two different ways of how to get rid of this garden area here. So we can either do the same thing that we were doing with the clone. I'll just make my brush a little bit bigger. I'm going to come to the bottom here. So this line shows where that target is. So I'm going to target down here. And you see that line is from this corner here. So I'm going to try to click in a little bit more, and we're just going to click away. Perfect. And then turn on the high layer. So you can see we're getting rid of the textures of that word, and make sure that we're duplicating the texture of the background. And voila. So that's one way to go about it. So the second way I'm going to show by playing with the global. So actually, I'm going to clone out this little area in this corner first. All right, so now we're going to play with the global. So another tool that you can use to get rid of the background or get rid of different logos is the patch tool. The difficulty with the patch tool, though, is that you have to make sure that you have enough room to drag whatever it is that you're going to be cloning or patching from. So right here is the patch tool. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to circle global. Make a nice little ring around it. So if there's ever a time when you need to add to the selection, you can either go up here where you can add, you'll click it and you'll be able to add. This one will be the add right here. You'll see the little plus sign. This one's to minus, so you could remove from the selection or you can add to the selection. Another way that you can even do it, also the shortcut would be, if you hold shift, you can add with it shift, and then with option will be minus. So I'm just going to add a little bit here to give it a little bit more leeway. I'm going to turn off that high layer. I'm going to subtract from here. So what I'm going to do is, because we have all this space at the bottom, I have the patch selected, so I'm going to click it, and then I'm just going to drag it down right beneath it. And you'll see the patch selection progress, and it basically will try to clone the same texture. So you'll just have to, you can go into it just a little bit more. You see like these dark areas here. And you can just keep pulling and keep dragging until it looks realistic and looks more of how you want it to look in the background. And you see it literally, you see these two dots here. if I drag it here, it literally will patch those same 2 dots there. So just be mindful of where you're patching from and where you're picking up and dragging from. Keep patching away. That's a tricky thing. It just depends on, like with this wall, because it's a textured wall, it just depends on what aesthetic you want for yourself. If you want it to look as clean as possible, smooth as possible, drag, drag. So now that we have that there, actually I'm going to get rid of this little line. I personally am not a fan of it. So now I'm going to turn on the high layer, and now we can see like the texture, the actual texture from the lettering. So that's when I will go back with the clone tool and just go away. And make sure your opacity is at 100 when you do this. Perfect. There we go. So now another thing that you can do, like what I would pretty much do if I want to clean up this background a little bit more, I would create a new layer on top of the low layer. So the reason I'm creating it on top of the low layer is because I'm only playing with the colors. I don't want to affect the textures in any way. I just want to smooth out these colors. So with that, I'm going to use the brush tool. So I can hit B for the shortcut or just click it. And then I'm going to click Option so I can get the eyedropper and I can pick the color that I want. I'm going to right click to make sure my harness is at 0, bring my size up a little bit, and I want to keep my opacity at about a 10. So this is where you kind of get into your little painterly mode. And I just want to brush in here and just make it, still keep the textures of it, but I just want to clean it up just a little bit. So I'm just going to click and brush away. And remember, the reason I'm bringing the hardness up just so I can show you guys how that looks. If you raise the hardness and the opacity, you will get these hard brushes, which doesn't do anything for your image. It just looks like a mistake. So just make sure that your hardness is always at the lowest, and then bring your opacity down just so it gives you more control with your layering. And I always have my left hand on the option button just so I can make sure I'm clicking colors that are near it. So now I'm going to zoom out in the image and turn on that before and after. Voila! So that right there is the basics of using all of the tools I usually use whenever I'm removing logos or anything. Using the brush tool, the eyedropper, the lasso tool to select, the clone stamp, and the patch tool. So those are the basics right there of retouching and cleaning up your image. All right, guys, so let's get to part 2. So part 2 is where it's going to be a little bit more difficult because we're trying to get the logos off of the boxing glove. So we're first going to zoom in here. So I'm going to start with the black glove right here. So with this, basically we can literally use different tools, but I'm going to start with the pen tool. The pen tool is one of my favorite tools when it comes to selecting on the images because you're able to really not create just a straight line, but a curved line. So I'm going to zoom in here just so we can see when I click here, you click that first click. With the second click, make sure that you hold the mouse. Do not let it go. And then when you pull, you're able to make this round edge with it. So you can see when you pull. So we're just going to pull and just get that roundness right here by her hip. So I'm going to hit Option. And I'm just going to click at the square. And then it just ends that first selection. So I'm going to go here and do the same thing, but I'm just going to bring it in slightly right here. And then I'm going to hit Option again and close that selection there. And then from here, I'm just going to go around. Bow, bow, bow. and then just go back to where I started. So when you see that circle, you press it there and it's going to close your patch selection. So now I'm going to right click, make selection, and I'm going to keep the feather at 1 only because we have the side of her right here where we still want to be able to get a little bit. Actually, I'm going to raise that feather up to 2. Just so we can be a little soft selection. It won't be a hard selection, so when we're painting or when we're cloning by her skin, it'll still keep like that nice roundness to it, and it won't look too sharp where it doesn't look believable. So now we have the selection. So we're going to start with the low layer. Actually, so there's different ways that we can go about this. I'm going to go the route of the painterly route. So we're going to start with the high, instead of starting with the low layer this time, I'm going to start with the high layer. So what I want to do first is just clone out the textures of the logo. So in like the previous video, we hit Option to select the texture, and then we're just going to start cloning away. Clone, clone, clone. I could come a little bigger. Remember, always be mindful of where you're clicking your target from. So luckily, because it's a boxing glove, the most of this image here has the same texture, like that grainy looking texture. So I'm just going to keep clicking from there, and I try not to click by where the logo is, but click further away from it so that you're not duplicating any of the logos or anything like that. There we go. All right, so right now it looks very, very blurry because now we have cloned that texture, and now we just have how it will look on the low layer. So the one way that you can go about it is you can clone it. The second way you can go about it is actually painting it. I want to go the painting way just to give you guys a little bit of practice with that. But what I'm going to do before I paint it, I'm going to extend the selection so that when we're painting the whole glove. So I'm going to right click and I'm just going to go to the poly lasso tool. I'm going to hit that shift so we can add to the selection. And I'm just going to come a little bit wider. I'm just going to spread this selection a little bit wider right here. All right. So now we're going to go to the layer 1 here. Remember where we brushed from this layer here. This is from the background layer, from when we just painted and cleaned up over here to the right. So I'm actually going to, just for safety, I'm going to just rename this right background. And then I'm going to create a new layer. And I'm going to call this one her right glove. Perfect. So now I'm going to go with the brush tool. And now we're just going to paint. So as you can see, there's a highlight in the middle here with the brush. There's a highlight in the middle of the glove here, and then you can see it just has the regular black of the glove on here. So we're going to start with the black here. Remember to always use that eyedropper so that you're actually cloning the actual color of the glove. You're not just making up a color or just picking a random one. And then we're just going to start painting away. And then I'm going to raise up my opacity because there's logos and things already on it. You want to raise up that opacity so you can paint over it. So I raise up instead of doing the 10, I raise up the opacity to a 61. So I'm just going to paint over right here. And then now I'm going to go back. I'm going to lower the opacity a little bit. So now that I want to create that highlight again, I'm going to select one of the highlight colors in here. And then I'm just going to start painting back over here. So now you can see it looks a little bit funny, and that's from that texture from the high layer. So I'm going to go back in the high layer and just start cloning out the texture. because sometimes, you know, the lettering, it'll clone the lettering and you can't really tell until you start going back in on a different letter. Now I'm going to deselect it, and there you go. And you could always go back in if you just want to add a little bit more, if you want to remove some of that highlight and make it a little bit smaller, and basically eye it from there. So now I'm going to go into the Everlast. So again, you can use the pen tool again. So I'm going to click from right here, and I'm going to click at the end point. Remember, you're going to hold and pull. See, and it gives you like a nice, you see how it gives you like that nice curve, so it's kind of following this line here. Then you hold that option, close it, come right out here. Remember, pull again. There we go. And then we're going to close that selection right there. Right click, make selection. Keep that feather at 2. So however you want to play it, you can either do the clone again, you can do the paint. I'm going to do the paint again, but I'm going to first start again with cloning the texture from the high layer. With this, you will have to make your brush a little bit smaller because the layer that you're cloning from is so much smaller than it was in the background. So we're just going to work our way letter by letter. Gets very, very tedious when it comes to locations that are in tighter sections of the image. With the background's usually somewhat the easiest because you're able to clone and pull from so many other places in the image. But when it's something like clothing or accessories, that's when it gets a little tough, and you have to get a nice finger workout while you're editing. There we go. So we're just clicking away. So as you can see, just holding. I try to click the target stamp area as often as possible. Right, almost there. This is the part where the new apps on social media make you think that you can just click a button and edit and it goes away, and it's really not that simple all the time. Alright, so we're going to keep clicking away. Perfect. So now we have the high layer. Actually, turn that back on. Now I can see a little bit more of where I need to clean up from. Perfect. So now with this still being selected, I'm going to go back to the right glove layer and start painting in again. And I'm going to raise up the opacity. Let's go to like a 58. And I'm just going to start painting away. So remember, always use that eyedropper so that you're basically you're cloning the correct color. Eyedropper here. Raise the opacity just a little bit, just to get that, make the blend a little bit smoother. And then now I'm going to go back to that high layer So now you can see that you just need to clean up on the cloning. And we want to get rid of these little lines. There we go. Just clean this little brush stroke. So you always want to make sure that you zoom out from the image, because how it looks when you're zoomed in will sometimes look completely different when you zoom out. So you want to make sure that you're going back and forth. So I'm just going to zoom out and just paint a little bit more. There you go. So usually when you're doing product shoots or shoots for clothing lines or specific products, you never want to mix brands. So these are the occasions when they would ask you to Photoshop the logo off of the boxing gloves if they're unable to get the plain boxing gloves without any logos on them. So there we go. So I want to leave these for you guys. This is going to be your class projects. I want to see you guys take off the logos over here and send them to me. Can't wait to see what you guys do. I will also send you guys the JPEG of the original image. So I just want to be able to see what you guys do. If you have any trouble or any questions, be sure to contact me and we can work through it together, and be on the lookout for the next tutorial. All right, so let's go into the left glove. So with this one, I'm just going to use the clone tool for the most part for this area. So first I'm going to start with the high layer turned off. We're going to go to the low layer here. Remember, the opacity is at 100, hardness is at 0, and then we're just going to clone away. There we go. Turn that high layer on, and now we're going to clone out that texture. Click, click, click. Easy peasy, guys, right? So I'm going to actually make another layer, and I'm going to call it the left glove. And it's just to paint in and just clean up any areas that just need a little bit of blending. There we go. So now with here, I'm going to use the poly tool because it's basically a straight line. And with here, you can literally, you can tell that it's a true black. So one thing that you can do, because it's a true black, you can create another layer on top of the high layer. And the reason I'm saying to put on top of the high layer is when you paint it in black, you'll be able to cover it fully. But when you put it underneath the high layer, you'll still have that texture and have to go back in there. But with there, you have it right over the high layer. So I'm just going to rename this black left glove. I like to stay organized with my edits just so I know if I need to go back into something, I know exactly what layer I need to work on and edit on. And then for here, I'm going to paint. So let's use that pen tool. Remember, click. You can click and hold to drag it to make the roundness. Click. Remember, hold that option to, there we go. And I'm going to right click, make selection. I'm going to turn off the high layer and I'm going to paint away. And I'm going to drop the opacity. Raise it up slightly. And we're just painting away. Alright, and I'm going to drop the opacity a little bit more so I can start blending. So unselect, you can see how blended it looks. Remember, I always say, remember to zoom out. Perfect, and then now we're going to turn the high layer on. Now I just have to clone out the texture. So I'm actually going to start pulling texture from this bottom of the glove here because the glove itself is the same material. It gives you a little bit more leeway to select from. I'm just going to keep clicking away. And then now we have it. And when we zoom out, done. Alright, so the last logo we have is this 5 in the back. And there's a couple different ways we can go about it. So I want to show a different technique. So because we clean up this background here, this background is basically the same background as this background here, correct? So what we're going to do is I'm going to select all of these layers. I'm going to drag it and duplicate it. I'm going to merge it together by hitting Command E. Another way to merge is to go to Layer. Is it in Layer? Yeah, Layer and Merge Layers. So now I have the merged layer. So what I'm going to do is we're going to start over here. And what I'm going to do is I want to select this area here. So I'm using the quick selection tool. The quick selection tool is great, but it's not the best only because it sometimes selects too much and not everything you need, but actually it's doing really, really good here because it selected all of that. Nice. So actually what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to subtract away from her face and the hair. All right, perfect. So we have this selection here. So I'm actually going to do, I'm going to create, with this same layer here, I'm going to create a mask. So if you hit this bottom square with the circle in the middle, it creates a mask of the layer. And I'm going to undo this keychain. So basically what the keychain does is if I move this image, the mask will move with you wherever you move it to. Oops, I went back too much. But if you unchain it, you can basically move the image voila. So now I'm moving, so I drag this background area to over here. But as you can see, because we masked it, it has like this hard edge here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the layer here to the right, the mask layer. We're going to use the brush, and we're just going to smooth out the selection, because you see it's a hard selection, it's a hard line. So we're just going to smooth it out. So black is to add to the selection, so we're just going to start. Remember, we have the hardness at 0, and I have the opacity low to about a 20. And I'm just painting away, click, 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 click. And we're just trying to soften that selection. So as you can see, we're starting to see black from the logo right there. So I'm just going to go back in with the white, and we're just going to paint away. I'm just going to paint it back. And I'm very, very meticulous, so I can see it's kind of a more, I want to say it's a little bit warmer. So I'm going to create another layer, and I'm going to, with Option Command, it basically will link the layer to whatever you're linking it to. So I'm just linking it right here. Actually, I'm going to create a color balance layer, and I'm going to link it. And I just want to add like a little blue. But that's just me being very meticulous. But there you go. And if you want, you can also create another layer, and we're just using the eyedropper to get that color. And I'm just going to paint on top of the selection. Perfect. So now we have an image that's clean of logos. So guys, I hope that this tutorial was very informative. I can't wait to see what you guys do with this image, and if you have any questions on any of the tools, any of the shortcuts, please let me know, and I look forward to showing you guys more editing videos. Alright guys, so this has been the tutorial where you learn to take out a logo from the background as well as the boxing gloves from this image. I can't wait to see what you guys do and what you guys start to create and edit. Let me know if you have any questions. I look forward to hearing from you guys, and let me know if there's any feedback or anything that I can do better. I look forward to teaching more classes and educating you guys and making you guys the best artists that you can be. Thank you.